We think women need to talk more openly about money because money really matters. It shouldn't be embarrassing or confusing. Join the conversation. We'll be discussing a whole range of topics which will help you get comfortable with your finances. Money Matters. Brought to you by AJ Bell.
Hello and welcome to our final AJ Bell Money Matters podcast for 2025. I'm Laura and I'm joined, of course, and as ever, by Danny. Hey, Danny.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everyone. Apologies. I'm seeing the back of 2025 off with a cold again, just like you, huh?
Like half the nation, I think. So we really apologise for our slightly nasal, croaky voices, but it's adding an end of year spirit to the podcast, I think, considering most people seem to be having a cold or something at the moment.
It does. We can all, feel the cheery, warm vibes as we leave 2025 behind. And I, for one, will be delighted to see the back of 2025. But I'm really excited for 2026, not least because the first podcast episode back is our 100th episode.
Which I genuinely can't believe. I know. When I saw that in the schedule and it was flagged by someone, I was like, that can't be right. Someone's counted wrong. But it turns out they haven't, and I should have more faith in the team. And it is actually our 100th episode. It's very exciting.
It is exciting. And we've got something special planned for that, which we'll tell you a bit more about later on. But I'm also excited because it is nearly Christmas. And since we're not doing a Christmas episode of the podcast, I thought it was just worth wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. And I thought I'd take the time to find out whether or not you're all sorted. Have you got your shopping done? Did you do your Black Friday deals?
What do you think, Danny? Do you think that there's a full list? Everything's been purchased ahead of time? Or do you think I'm just willy-nilly leaving it till Christmas Eve? What do we think is more my personality type?
Well, normally I would have said you would have had a spreadsheet, you'd have got everything written down, except this year maybe interrupted by the budget. I don't know.
No, I don't let such trivial things as the budget get in the way of my Christmas planning. Don't you worry. Yes, definitely made use of the Black Friday sales. I think I've now bought every present. And then this weekend I thought, should I start wrapping or is it too early? But I think probably it's not too early. But I'm so excited for Christmas this year. I think I was away last year for Christmas, which was obviously lovely. We all know I love a holiday. But it means that I'm got renewed enthusiasm for like a British Christmas. My daughter is like the perfect age to be super into Father Christmas. I'm just so excited. I'm not normally the biggest Christmas fan, but this year it's Christmas on steroids for me.
Well, we've got a different Christmas because, as you know, my eldest is off at university and she comes back at the weekend. So we actually get to be excited that all four of us are going to be together, and it'll be a novelty to sit around the table and chat and find out what people have been up to. So, yeah, recalibrating Christmas this year.
Oh, that's so lovely. I love this. Now, Danny, are you going to spend some of that quality family time over Christmas doing your tax return?
No, I've done. And get this is exciting news. I'm due a rebate.
Oh, those are the best words you could hear at this time of year, right? Yes. Bonus money. Because not to bring us back to boring financial matters, but there is a looming tax deadline that happens to fall near the end of year period. And I'm always slightly blown away. So every year, HMRC send out the stats on the number of people that have filed their tax return on Christmas Eve, Boxing Day, and even on Christmas Day. Now, no judgment for people, but, I can't imagine. I love admin, I love a spreadsheet, and I love finances, but you would not catch me doing my tax return on Christmas Day.
I would be a bit worried because normally I've cracked open the fizz before I start, on with the turkey. Yeah. And can you imagine fizz and numbers? I'm not sure that would prove to be particularly
rebates for everyone.
Well, there we go. Yeah. And we promised last episode that we had a gift for you. It's not the kind that you wrap and put under the tree, but Abby Glue from accounting firm, the Erenda Collective, she shares some top tips on who needs to file a self-assessment tax return all the important dates you need, when and how to choose an accountant to help you if you need it.
And our one big thing this week kind of ties into this festive season where lots of people are inevitably spending more, whether that's on the Black Friday sales or on Christmas presents. And it's something I've loved finding out about, mainly because I'm just really nosy and I like to get into how other people's financial lives are going. Which is also, why I love the confession bit on the podcast the most. But Money Matters, with the help of our friends at Opinium, have done some research on secret spending, Danny. So when people in relationships spend cash without telling their partner about it, can you imagine something so scandalous?
I can, and I've done it. I when I saw the data that came out of this, I was like, oh my goodness me. I feel like I need to unburden my soul. So we'll have the confession right at the beginning of the podcast, because I've done it. My husband and I actually have a joint account for bills, but we keep two separate accounts. And that's kind of because I don't want him to know how much I'm spending on getting my hair cut and coloured every few weeks. And he doesn't want me to know how much he's spending on books from the charity shop, which are currently in the boot of his car, I have to say.
I love that you're, confessing this. And I think, we looked into these figures and I'll delve into them in a second, but I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, this secret spending. We'll come to it. I think it depends, what you're spending on and how much you're spending. The odd bit of money here or there is probably fine, isn't it? But in any way, you're not alone. So over half of Brits in a relationship have spent cash in the past 12 months without telling their partner. Now, on average, this surprised me. On average, people are spending £2,158 a year without telling their partner. But men are secretly spending more money than women. So they're spending just over £2,500 on average in comparison to just under £1,800 for women, which I thought was interesting.
Well, that does probably equate to one haircut every month, doesn't it? Cut and colour. Yeah, I think about that. And that's terrifying when you boil the numbers down like that and you realise how much money you're spending on getting your hair done. But on that subject, so it's a different number for men and women, but are there different things that they're also spending money on, like haircuts?
Yeah, that actually did come up, kind of like beauty products and appointments featured on the women's top list where it didn't on men's. Clothes was the common denominator, so that was kind of the most popular secret spending outlet. So spending money on clothes, and that could be people buying clothes and doing the old rip out the price tag and say, this old thing, I've had it for ages. Or it could be people saying, oh, that t-shirt cost me a tenner, when actually it cost them more than that. So there's probably some different levels to the secret spending. But yeah, clothes was a common top one across both men and women. But for men, there were also things like cigarettes and alcohol, using the cash for gambling, which I thought was slightly worrying maybe, and then also sending gifts to family and friends without telling their partner. On the side of women, as I mentioned, clothes were top, but then they were also more likely to spend on those beauty products, including appointments, a bit like you, Danny, and then gifting cash to their children or giving to friends and family. And then interestingly, in the top 5 for women was putting money in savings secretly, which I thought was interesting. But I think men are more likely to kind of conceal spending on short-term habits, where women are more likely to be hiding kind of financial gifts or that money that's going into savings. So I thought that was interesting.
It is interesting. And were there any other really interesting tidbits that you spotted?
Yeah, so there was a generational difference as well. So Gen Z are spending more in secret than older generations. So we found that 18 to 34-year-olds spent the most secretly of any age group. So they had an average of just over £4,300 spent in secret in the past 12 months. That drops down to just under £400 spent in secret for those over the age of 55. I think some of that's probably quite easily explained in that if you're in that younger age category and you're in a relationship, you're less likely to have kind of merged finances with your partner. So it might be that you're spending money without telling your partner how much different things cost, but you're not actively necessarily keeping it a secret, if you get me. You're not lying about it, but you're just don't have that full financial transparency yet. Whereas I think oftentimes when people are kind of older or they're retired, they're more likely to have these kind of merged finances by that point in life. I think one of the other alarming things that came out of it is that some men and women are using this secret money to put money into cryptocurrencies. So we know that crypto has become this hugely popular thing, particularly among younger generations. We see a lot of people putting their money into it rather than kind of investing in the more conventional methods. But it feels, I don't know, there's something that makes me feel slightly uneasy about people secretly putting money into crypto, which we know is very high risk. And quite often people putting money into that aren't necessarily fully aware of how high risk it is, and how potentially dangerous it can be in terms of losing their money.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, putting money secretly into things like crypto, it does feel like a very difficult conversation if you were going to have it with your partner. And I also get the age thing as well, because I suppose when you've been with your partner a long time, they know you really well. So I joke about the amount of cash that I spend on my hair, but my husband is fully aware of that. He just likes to pretend that he is not aware of that and bring it up from time to time just to, lord it over me. And I suppose, I mean, you were saying it's not always a bad thing, right?
No, exactly. I don't think it's, if you're spending money without telling your partner, it's inherently or categorically a bad thing. I think it depends on the context with this. So, are you hiding spending or hiding a gambling habit or hiding how much money you're gifting to family and friends from your partner? And you're kind of actively hiding that, and that could be problematic. Or is it just you don't have that full merged finances and you don't have full transparency, and you spent £150 on a pair of jeans and you just choose not to mention how much they cost? I think there's some differences and some nuance into that. I also think it's like, is the secret spending indicating a bigger issue in your relationship? So is it because you don't feel like you can have that transparency and you don't have the ability to talk freely about your finances with your partner? Or is it just kind of that day-to-day spending is happening and you're not talking about it? Because we do know from our previous research that one of the big downfalls of why women can end up with less money in savings and investments and overall less wealth than men is because they're not having these open conversations about money with their partner. So whether that's who's going to pay for what if you go off on maternity leave, or how your finances are going to be split, who pays for what in day-to-day life, and how much you have left at the end of the month. We know that lots of those conversations need to be had to have that true financial equality. And so I think if you're one of these secret spenders, like you, Danny, you can think about, is this part of an issue where we're just not transparent about our finances now, about our future plans? And my secret spending is, harming our long-term financial goals, which I definitely don't think it is with you, Danny. Or is it just I'm spending a little bit here and there and I don't feel the need to tell my partner exactly, every time I spend a tenner on something or give a bit of money to my parents or whatever. So I think it's a good point to kind of question what are your motivations for not being fully transparent, and do you think it taps into an underlying problem?
Harmony. That is my motivation for not being fully transparent. Sometimes what he doesn't need to know, he really doesn't need to know. That's how we keep the house running on track. And I have to say, another thing that does always create financial friction in my house, and it did last year and the year before, not so much this year because, as I say, woohoo, rebate, but if we've not set aside enough money to cover a tax bill, or if we've not considered having to pay a tax bill on account, and suddenly you get to January, which is always a hard month, let's be honest. The money never stretches very far in January. Then, that can cause a great deal of friction. And some of you listening to this might be thinking, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Payment on account, tax bills. But if you have got a tax bill coming your way, or maybe you're filing a self-assessment tax return for the first time, it really is worth it just to keep listening.
We touched on this in the last episode where Eleanor was talking about making money from Vinted, and her confession was all about her tax bill and becoming a limited company. So that's part of the reason that we thought we would get the lowdown on everything you need to know about filling out your self-assessment tax return from someone who does it many, many, many times a year for her clients. So Abby Glue is from the accountancy firm Arenda Collective, but she and her team are more than just accountants. They're on a mission to make the complicated world of tax more simple and to enable people to ask questions and actually understand the answers. So that's exactly a spirit Money Matters can get behind. Ditch the tax jargon. And she's got a simple toolkit to help you figure out if you need to file a tax return and what you need to do about it.
Tax. It is something that, well, I would say all of us, but most of us have to pay. And it often comes as an unpleasant shock. And I think if you work in a company and you're an employee, often you don't have to consider self-assessment tax returns. But if you're self-employed or you get a bit of extra income, you do. So we're going to try and break down some of the jargon, the misconceptions, and give people a bit of a steer about this murky world that is tax. And I want to start with what I hope is an easy one. When is the next deadline for filling in a tax return?
Yep. So the next deadline is for the 24-25 tax return, and that is due by the 31st of January 2026. So less than a couple of months away.
What I'm always struck by is HMRC putting out every Christmas the number of people who've been sat on their couch after eating the turkey who fill in their tax returns over Christmas. But I guess that is the point, that they've got a bit of time. Is it a lengthy job?
I think it massively depends on the complexity of your tax return. I think it can be a quicker job if you've not got that much to report, or it's fairly simple. It can be longer if you've got more complex things to think about. So I would always, we massively stress, do it as soon as you can. Give yourself plenty of time. So if there's anything you need to check, look into, etc., you've got the time to do it and you're not rushing.
And if it is complex, obviously, seek some advice from people like yourself. And I want to get into that a little bit more later on, but let's stick with dates at the moment. Are there any other dates below that 31st of January that you just mentioned that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, so 31st of January is obviously the filing deadline. It's also a payment deadline. So if you've got tax due, you're going to need to pay it by that point as well. Another one is the payment on account deadline, which will be the 31st of July 2026. And that's your second payment on account for the following tax year. That catches people out. I think we'll probably cover payments on account a little bit later, but 31st of July is one to put in your calendar if you pay taxes. Another one, 5th of October. So you need to register for self-assessment on the 5th of October following the end of the tax year if you need to file a self-assessment tax return. And people often sort of miss that deadline. It's quite a random one to remember. So definitely think about that. And I think one that's really poignant for this year is April 26, because if you are going to be mandated under Making Tax Digital for income tax, starting from April is when you are going to be in that first quarter for reporting periods. So if you've got self-employed income or rental income, you need to be aware of that date and start looking now as to what you need to do from that point.
Okay, a bit less easy now. Who needs to fill one in?
Lots of different people for lots of different reasons. So some of the common ones that people probably know more readily, like if you've got self-employed income, if you have rental income, if you have income from things like dividends, or you have shares, for example, that you've made capital gains on. But there are a few that sort of catch people out. So people that need to pay the child benefit charge back, people that have foreign income, people that receive sort of tips or commissions that aren't taxed through their payroll. Who else? People that are in a partnership business, they also need to file a tax return. I think there's so many different factors that what I always recommend, there's a tool that HMRC have created that's actually quite useful, which is not that common for HMRC tools. But if you Google it, like check if I need to file a tax return. If you click on the link, it sort of takes you through a series of questions, and you answer those questions based on your specific situation, and it will tell you whether you need to file a tax return. I think if in doubt, ask an accountant, speak to them, because majority of accountants will offer a sort of free initial intro question like session. So if you're not sure, always ask, because you don't want to be in a position where you should have filed and you haven't.
What happens if you should have filed and you haven't?
You get penalties and interest. So definitely want to avoid it. It depends on the situation as to what those penalties are going to be and how late you are, and whether it was like an omission through small error or whether they deemed it to be, you were specifically choosing not to declare taxes that you knew about. So I think, penalties and interest, so you want to avoid it wherever possible.
Because I suppose some people might think that they would get a nudge from HMRC saying, hey, you need to submit a form, but that doesn't happen.
No, not always. And sometimes you don't get that nudge until a couple of years after, because they're pretty slow to sort of instigate and realise these things. So it's your responsibility. The burden is on you as the taxpayer to understand whether you need to pay taxes or not, which is tough because the tax system is so complex. And, even as somebody that works in it, you can't possibly know absolutely everything. So I think it's a difficult one. But if in doubt, just always check, ask that question, and then hopefully you can avoid any of those issues.
And you already mentioned earlier the 31st of January is also the date that you need to pay if you owe any tax. If you do owe tax, is it a simple process to pay? Do you get a nudge from HMRC saying, yes, you need to pay this amount?
Yeah, it's a reasonably simple system to actually make the payment. You've got a couple of different options in terms of how you do it. So, you can do it via your government gateway account. You can do it via bank transfer. If you're super prepared, you can set up things like a direct debit so that it collects automatically. Do they nudge you? Yes, but I wouldn't rely on it. So it depends on how you've opted for communication to come from them. Sometimes it will come via a letter. The letters are often quite delayed or they get lost. If you've opted for communication via your government gateway, you sort of get a nudge in there, but I wouldn't rely on it. So I always recommend to people, know the deadlines, put a reminder in your diary 2 weeks ahead of that, and make sure that you've got the payment ready to go so that you don't forget, or if there's any complications with making the bank transfer or anything like that, it's not being left to the last minute. Because if you're on the 31st of January, something goes wrong with your bank and you can't pay it, and then you're going to start getting penalties or interest. It's just not worth the stress.
I've heard lots of people talking about, hey, I've set aside money for my tax that I'm going to owe, but sometimes they can get caught out. And you mentioned earlier about paying tax on account. What's that about?
Yes, this catches so many people out. Payments on account are advance payments for the following tax year's liability. So they're usually set at 50% per payment of the previous tax year's liability. They don't apply to everybody. They only apply to people whose taxable bill is over £1,000 and not more than 80% of it is being collected via the tax code or via your payroll. So it's not relevant to everybody, but it's sort of relevant to those that are self-employed, earning dividend income, rental income, etc. What I would say is people always sort of get really angry about paying in advance to HMRC, and they always think, HMRC are making me pay tax with money that I haven't received. You have actually received or earned the money by the point that you make that first payment on account. So if you think for the 25-26 tax year, which is the one that we're in now, the first payment on account that you make will be in January. And that's already 10 months into that tax year. And the tax amount that you pay is 50% of last year's tax bill. So in theory, you've already had and earned that money. The next payment that you make will be in July, and that's after the tax year. So you've definitely had or earned that money. So in theory, if you've started saving right from the start of either having your business or earning this income that you need to pay tax on, you should have already saved that money. I think it catches people out because, people don't necessarily start saving straight away. And therefore, they think they're just saving for that amount that's due in January, not thinking about the payment on account for the following tax year. So I think it's all about just being prepared and starting to save as soon as you possibly can.
Very good advice. I promised that we would cover this off after we spoke to Eleanor on our last podcast. Side hustles. I know, particularly with the cost of living crisis, lots of people have been making money from selling things like clothes on sites like Vinted. So do you have to pay tax on that?
It depends, which is a really annoying answer. In most instances, if you are just selling your personal items and you're selling them at less than what you paid for them, and it's not something that you're doing super regularly, it's just something you do occasionally, it's not going to be taxable. It's not a trade, and you're not actually making money on it because you sold it for less than you paid for it. So for the average person using Vinted, selling a little bit of stuff on eBay, it's not going to be relevant. I think the point at which those sort of Vinted stuff tips into being taxable is if you are doing it super regularly and the values are reasonably high. So, there's now legislation that requires companies like Vinted to report to HMRC if certain thresholds are crossed. So that's designed to catch people out that, aren't declaring those taxes that should be. But I would say for the majority of people, you don't need to worry about it. And I think this was a sort of big misconception that started circulating on sort of social media when the rules first came in, caused panic unnecessarily. And I think it actually only affects a very small number of people.
And for those who do turn it into a business, like Eleanor, is it worth setting up a limited company? Because as her confession said, she felt that she hadn't done it soon enough, and therefore she ended up paying more tax than perhaps she would have done otherwise.
Again, it depends. It's such a personal situation. We need to be looking at not only how much are they making from this side hustle or from this business, but also what other sources of income have they got? And not just thinking about tax as well. There's other reasons why you might set up a limited company that aren't just limited to tax. So, if you want that limited liability protection, you can't get that when you're self-employed. If you want to be able to get that sort of brand reputation that comes from having a limited company, again, that's not something that's available to you from a self-employed perspective. So I think each case has to be considered on its own merits. So I wouldn't give like a blanket, yes, definitely set up a limited company, or no, definitely don't. It really depends on your personal situation. I think it also depends on people's appetite for compliance and administration, because self-employed, although it is becoming more burdensome in terms of admin, especially with Making Tax Digital coming in, is less complex and less taxing, excuse the pun, than running a limited company. There's a lot more requirements that you have to follow when you operate a limited company, and that isn't for everybody, and it really depends on the value of income you're getting as to whether that's going to be worth it. And I think this is even more poignant following the recent budget. They've made changes to dividend tax. A couple of years ago, they made changes to corporation tax. And actually that sort of margin of benefit of being limited versus self-employed has actually been corroded over time. So, tax isn't the only consideration for it. I would really just recommend everybody have a proper conversation with an accountant before making that decision.
I'm not just going to excuse the pun, I'm going to celebrate the pun, because this is taxing. There will be a lot of people listening to this right now who maybe are feeling slightly sick, maybe overwhelmed, because it is crazy complicated. If people do need to get help, so getting an accountant might seem like the obvious answer here, but sometimes finding the right one is hard. So what can they do?
It's really hard. And the thing that's actually really scary is the term accountant isn't protected. So anyone could literally set themselves up call themselves an accountant. They might have absolutely no experience, no qualifications, and have never done a single tax return in their life and still have the right to call themselves an accountant. So it is a bit of a minefield. What I would say is you want to be looking at the credibility of the accountant. So, what qualifications and experience do they have? Not all qualifications are equal, and you need to be checking that the qualifications that people are claiming to have are accurate. So, there's ways that you can do that. So, for example, we're a chartered accountants firm and we're regulated by the Institute of Chartered Accountants. They have a register at which you can search and see that we are regulated, for example. So I would say starting to look at what qualifications the accountants have and whether they are verifiable and whether they are suited to the sort of requirements of your business, because there's different qualifications, different levels. And, if you've got a really small side hustle, maybe a specific qualification is going to be fine for you. If you've got really complex tax matters, maybe you need a chartered accountant. So I think about that. I would also check out reviews. So, look at their Google reviews, etc. See that they've got good reviews, because that is obviously a really good indication of whether they're going to be a good firm to work with or not. Ask friends and family for recommendations. It's always nice to hear a personal recommendation of somebody that's had a good experience to know whether they're the right business to support you. I think another thing is, speak to a few. If you aren't sure what you want and you've not done this before, you're not sure what the process is, speak to a few different accountants so you can kind of get a feel for them as a person, them as a firm, what different services are available to you before you make a decision.
Because sometimes it feels like a closed shop, doesn't it? Sometimes when you talk to an accountant, you don't understand, you don't feel comfortable, and you don't feel that you can ask the questions that you need. And finding someone that's prepared to talk to you in the way that you're talking to us today, no jargon, straightforward, can be hard.
Yeah, which is why I think it's really important to speak to a few different people. Think of it as like going on a date with an accountant. You're seeing whether they're the right sort of vibe for you. And I think it's really, really important that you do have an accountant that you have that comfortable relationship with, that you feel like you can ask questions and that you're going to get an answer that actually explains it in like simple terms, is easy to understand. It doesn't like gatekeep information. That's one of the things that we see really commonly, like feedback from people that have joined us from other firms, is that accountants don't necessarily share their knowledge. They will just say yes or no to something and not explain why. And I think it's really important as the business owner or as the taxpayer to actually understand why you're being advised something. So you want to be able to have open, honest conversations with people, and you need to feel comfortable to do that. I think it's something that's super prevalent for women as well. Like, we have so many clients that will prefix a question with, sorry, this is probably a stupid question. And I always say to people, like, no question is a stupid question. And actually, questions that are easy are great because it's easy for me to answer. Like, I like silly questions. They're really easy to answer. So I think, doing a bit of shopping around, finding somebody that actually suits you and your personality and the way that you like to work, because different firms do things in different ways, and there'll be something that will suit you. You just might not find it on that first chat.
Abby, it's been an absolute delight talking to you. If we'd gone on a speed date, that would be it now. We'd be off into the sunset. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Some really useful tips in there. And I love the idea of speed dating sessions so you can pick your perfect accountant. I feel like actually that should apply for every adulting thing you have to do in life. If you need to sell your house and you need to find an estate agent, line them all up and give them 2 minutes to give their pitch to you. I think it should go for all of them. But of course, Danni, I want to know, did she have a confession?
She did, and it was really interesting because it is a confession that we have heard many times before from women who work in finance. And before I let you go, this is your time to share your financial confession or dilemma.
I think I have many financial confessions. I would say there's probably the sort of misconception that accountants or people that work in finance have it all figured out and have always had it figured out, which I can assure you is not the case. Despite working in this industry since I was 18, I didn't start investing until I was 25. For the first 3 years of having my business, didn't contribute to a pension, despite advising all of my clients to do the same. When I was younger, despite earning like a reasonable salary, I still used to spend on credit cards and not have a good money budget. And I think it wasn't until I really engaged in the process and thought, actually, what are my long-term goals here? What am I spending my money on? What do I want my retirement to look like? That I actually made those changes. And I kick myself every day for not having done it sooner, because when I look at, if I'd have started investing at 18, what I would have now, I think, God, that was a terrible decision. But you can't change what's happened. You can only change what you do now. So I would say, even if you are in a position where you think, actually, my finances are out of control, I've not been saving for tax, I've got some debt, don't bury your head in the sand. Start where you are now and just make sort of incremental micro improvements. And in the long term, you will get to where you want to be if you're willing to, start where you are and invest some time and energy into it.
I love that. Start where you are. Abby, thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
I feel like I've said this so many times before, but it's about doctors being terrible patients, is the old adage. And it's that thing of you deal with things day to day and all the things you should do, but you just never get around to sorting it out for yourself at home. And I kind of get it. If you spend all day doing something, the last thing you want to do with your spare time is do that very same thing again. But it's understandable, I think.
It is understandable, and you're right. Not only has it been a confession that we've heard many times, but we've also explained that we ourselves are guilty of doing just that. And sometimes it is just a matter of time, but also it's a matter sometimes of just the realization that, hang on a second, I'm talking to people about their financial lives, how to make their lives better and, get themselves set for the future. But actually, I haven't done it for myself, and it is now time to take that small first step.
100%, definitely. That is everything that we have for this episode. And as we said, this is our final pod of 2025. The next pod will be the first of 2026 and that big 100 episode.
Yes, and we thought it would be interesting to go back to some of our previous podcast guests and ask them to send us a voice note telling us how their financial lives have changed since they appeared on the pod last. So do listen out for that. If you haven't already subscribed to the pod, make sure that you do that so you don't miss an episode. And why not give your female friends and family a brilliant gift this Christmas and introduce them to the AJ Bell Money Matters campaign? Point them to the website, ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk. We've got loads of articles and podcasts to help them to step into 2026 in fine financial fettle.
Which is what we will also be discussing early next year, how to start simple money habits and keep them. So unlike many New Year's resolutions that don't last past the first week in January, we'll be talking about how you can actually stick to some good money habits in 2026. But until then, do keep an eye on our social media, all the usual places, Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. We are at AJ Bell Money Matters. And if you haven't already, you can treat yourself by signing up to our newsletter via the website so that you don't miss a thing. Thanks very much for listening.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.